Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody's had a great 2 sessions so far. I'm pleased to start the next segment and here to introduce to Sanjeev Kumar, who you've already met. Sanjeev is the CEO, founder of Whiteside. They produce the most amazing, really, if you haven't used their intelligence, the analysis they provide on fintech, I strongly suggest you should go and have a look at it. Sanjeev, over to you.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks for the kind introduction. So we have a very exciting set of panelists today to discuss open banking and open finance trends. And we have a mix of data aggregation, innovation infrastructure players, and an open finance third-party provider on the panel. The only one we are probably missing is a representative from bank, but I reckon we can get a view from all the 3 panelists on how the banks are thinking about open banking in the region. So welcome, panelists. I think Alina has just joined. So I'll just give a brief introduction of the panelists, starting with Alina. So we have Alina Belita, Growth Officer at Saltage. She is also responsible for global strategic initiatives and business development at the firm. Saltage is an open banking data aggregation platform with a presence in several countries across the globe. And I'm assuming Alina is a part of the expansion strategy to the Middle East region as well. Welcome, Alina.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Next, we have Zubran Al-Sharani, who is the co-founder of Muddahar. So Muddahar is a leading open finance fintech platform based in Saudi, which enables use cases like savings, investments, budgeting, and more around consumer finances by integrating the bank accounts of the consumer. Welcome, Zubran.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And finally, we have Abe Karat, Chief Product and Innovation Officer at Fintech Galaxy. What a beautiful name for a fintech firm, I must say. Fintech Galaxy is positioned as an open finance and open innovation platform, which helps banks with open banking compliance mandates, provides the data aggregation layer, and also helps with the customer-facing use cases that banks can build in partnership with TPPs and fintechs. Welcome, Abe.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. So our topic today is open banking expectations, opportunities, and challenges. So I just wanted to get started with the expectations, right? Probably the easiest of the lot in terms of what we all expect from the regulators, from the banks in the region. So we are seeing a lot of countries going about their open banking journey, and most of that journey is nudged by the regulators, especially in the Middle East region. So I wanted to start with the expectation discussion from 2 angles. One is because regulators are driving the open banking journey in most of the countries in Middle East. What do you think is the expectation of regulators as they go about their business of opening the industry? And the second angle is, what is the expectation of industry players like yourselves? What kind of wish list you have from regulators as key industry stakeholder in the open finance journey? So maybe let's start with Alina, and then we can go around the table.
Thank you. So in comparison to other regions that I'm overviewing, I expect the GCC to have the fastest ride to embracing open banking use cases, especially in e-commerce, low-cost payments, automatizations of lending, PFM, automatization of SMEs services, treasury management. This is what we at Saltage witnessed in Europe in the beginning. Only that the region has the experience of other countries to learn from, and has already international banks that are open banking ready, like Standard Chartered recently declared they've made their APIs available in the Saudi market. And it has suppliers like us that already know the typical mistakes to avoid in an open banking journey that will make it less costly and less painful. For example, we are pre-integrated with top core banking systems in the region, like Temenos, Finastra, Mambu, Thought Machine, and we help banks to become compliant with the open banking standard. In terms of the expectations that the TPPs and from the demand side, I see a lot of names that drive demand in GCC, and they drive directly open banking adoptions by the end users, and that would be Beyond Money, Ion Digital, Tarabu, Dapi, Lean, even FinTech Galaxy. And there is a movement from the regulator, but our expectation and my personal fear is that the one of the inclusion, it should be very easy, let's say, for all kinds of all kinds of segments of TPPs to get a right to get a license, a process that is really working, for example, in Europe, which is very more difficult in Australia, for example, and it's depending on the framework that the regulator will embrace to streamline that. I see traction around the payment because most of the fintechs in MEA region, 85% of them are around payments, remittances, transfers, and so on. So I guess the first use cases will be around that. From the bank side, there is always the challenge to understand what's the benefit from the banks. And they don't really understand it now, but this is something like all of us here on the panel work towards. And it's our mission somehow to explain them what's in it for them in the open banking journey, because we can kind of make this work only if we are together in it. Thanks.
Thanks, Elena. So Zubran, you're doing a lot of things on the consumer side. Why don't you help us understand what you're seeing in the market in terms of Middle East in general, but maybe Saudi in specific? What kind of consumer expectations you are witnessing where open banking has a big role to play?
All right. Well, when we look at open banking, it's a really exciting time here in Saudi Arabia. Everyone's prepping up for it, whether it's the banks, the fintechs, or the regulator. And there has been a lot of movement lately on that side. But I think when, just back to a point that Alina mentioned, it's two different expectations. So the fintechs are more excited. The consumers want that, they want to have that high tech, they want to have that instant gratification services. On the other side, banks are still trying to figure out their strategic position when it comes down to open banking. What does this make sense to them? And between these two, the regulator is kind of in the middle, trying to move the agenda when it comes down to open banking. And this is how we see it. A lot of the fintechs are ready, and we're waiting on banks to provide more APIs, more services. And the banks are still trying to figure out. Some have taken great, steps when it comes down to open banking, but I think more can be done from the bank side. I believe by Q4 we're going to see, a lot of movement in open banking. I believe a draft will be out soon for the regulations of open banking from SAMA, and it'll just be, it's just an exciting time when we look at it here in Saudi Arabia.
Perfect.
Sanjeev, I'd like to add something to that comment, actually, both to what Alina and Gibran had kindly shared. You asked about the expectation, and in my opinion, I feel that the region has to do things a bit differently. So what we've seen is that regulators will lift and shift a regulatory framework from one country and expect that it's going to work in their country. You'll see Bahrain, they took over the UK standard. Some countries are saying, you know what, we want to do more open finance right through the door. We're just going to take the Australian CDR. And in my mind, one of the expectations is, guys, just slow down and understand your market. Localize your thought process and understand what works and what doesn't work. Another thing which is very interesting is, and it ties to the point I just made, we say open banking is supposed to help financial inclusion, right? But what's interesting is open banking by definition is only based on payment accounts. So you have to have an account in order for you to use open banking or benefit from it. So in my view, right from the beginning, there should be an understanding of, if I wanted to really help with financial inclusion, why don't I standardize the API specifications and bring in wallets? A wallet has a balance and has transactions just like a payment account. But guess what? A lot of the unbanked, they can only get an e-wallet, they cannot get a bank account. So just by one small tweak. Another thing when it comes to expectation, Why are some regulators just focusing on retail? Bahrain has been the pioneer. And now we're talking to banks and saying, hey, you want to do treasury management? You want to aggregate your balances? Yeah, of course, that'd be great. That will help our corporates. Guess what? We can't do it because our APIs are not allowing us to expose balances for corporates. But why is that the case? Why was that ring-fenced from the beginning? And it's not just that it wasn't done from the beginning. It wasn't even on the roadmap. It's like, okay, we're open banking ready. We're good to go. So in my mind, expectations should be towards the regulators and others in the region to take a step back, understand your local market, and understand what makes sense to add value. And the bank, their expectation is this whole value creation piece. They're always thinking of this as a checkbox exercise. Well, guys, why don't you from the beginning sit down and understand how do you create value? Some banks who are doing it very well in Saudi, I was at Seamless, and you hear BSF, Bank Saudi Fransi. They're like, guys, open banking is table stakes. We're doing BaaS. We have a new revenue stream. It's banking as a service. Let's go. So to me, that's the right mindset, and that should be the expectation that we need to consider and to reflect in our thought process going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks for touching on those points, Abe. I think there's a nice segue to the next section, which is opportunities, right? And you touched upon some of the opportunities that open banking unlocks for the industry. So maybe the first one that we can start with is, the evolution from open banking to open finance and eventually to open data. How do you see that coming across, and what kind of evolution journey seem to be more suitable for countries in the Middle East region? Let's start with Abe, maybe yourself, and then we can go to Zubran
Sure.
and Alina.
It is a natural progression, and we hear about it all the time: open banking, open finance, open data, open economy, and it sounds great. The question again, it boils down to execution. How do you execute this in a way that makes sense? And in my mind, number one, a phased approach is absolutely required. Number two, this phased approach has to be backed with a very strategic roadmap and milestones, and there has to be a certain level of accountability. Again, I reflect on Bahrain. They did a good job where they set phases to implement certain APIs, even within open banking. But then if they were to continue the journey, and as a matter of fact, they're now thinking, how do we expand it into open finance? And a third point is look at the product set and look at the market and look at the readiness. It doesn't make sense for you to say, oh, we're going open finance, and in the next 2 quarters, we're going to integrate all the insurance companies, when you know that probably insurance companies in a given country have more archaic legacy solutions than the banks themselves. So you're setting yourself up for failure. So understanding the market and product fit is another aspect. And then the last thing I would say is, which ties back to my previous point, is think about the value you're trying to create in the short, medium, and long term. So in my mind, I am advising my clients, like, guys, don't do open banking. Don't. Just forget about it. Just leapfrog. Start open finance right away. Why? Because it may take just adding one simple product that actually will expand your value 10 times by just simply adding, cards, or by simply adding, one product, which is actually like a mortgage and a loan, secured, unsecured, etc. In essence, the structure of the product is the same, and the rest are semantics. So why don't you put that in your data model up front and then take small steps to introduce these capabilities? So, and to me, that is one of the most important of all of the considerations that I shared with you, because that's what's going to allow you to help the market see the value. And when they see the value, that's when they start marching to the beat and moving towards that in lockstep. One more thing I'll share, and then I'll pass it over to my colleagues to provide their input, is moving to open data is a natural progression, but I really like what Australia had done when they wrote their CDR. It was from the beginning with that mindset accounted for. So you look at the regs, and it doesn't just talk about banking or financial products. It talks about how to standardize data from government entities. It talks about utility companies, telcos, electrical. So with that thinking, you are already laying the foundation from the beginning, which will allow you to really move faster when it comes to putting the right infrastructure in place. So we're just thinking ahead when it comes to the bigger picture, which is open data and then open economy.
Absolutely. And if you look at Australia, they have already started to bring open energy into the mix after open banking, and they're talking about open telecom, open healthcare, and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
So coming to you, Gibran, especially in Saudi, if you look at the initiatives from SAMA and also the FSDP objectives that have come across around, so they have talked about a couple of things. One, they have talked about increasing the penetration of digital payments. Second, they have talked about growing the capital markets in the country. And third, they have talked about growing the savings rate among the consumers in Saudi. So how do you see the relevance of open finance, because especially in terms of savings, payments, and investments and wealth management in KSA?
Great question, and it works perfectly with Abe discussed a minute ago. When we look at the sequence and the phases that we need, it's, for us as fintechs, I want it now. I need open finance now. And I would agree on that point of let's do open finance. I'm not really too excited about, especially on the information side. That can always catch up, and it's a nice feature to have. But we need to monetize. A lot of these are small companies that are coming up, and we need to have these services because they're more tangible and more sticky when it comes down to customers. Now, for the regulator, which one should they focus on? Because on the other side, where there's banks and there's the investment banks and brokerages and so on, that's where it gets messy. An example is KYC. So if we're going to do an eKYC, how is that going to be processed? Who's going to process it exactly? That's one question that comes up. Payments. I would love to have open payments set up. This way it would make it easier and smoother and cheaper for the consumer to use the open finance APIs. So sequencing is, doesn't sound good for us as entrepreneurs. Actually, we want it all right now. And that's kind of the sticky spot that SAMA and other regulators are at right now. Yet, as you mentioned, they do have this ambitious strategy they just rolled out. They're talking about supporting entrepreneurship. They're talking about supporting the fintech industry. And they're going to work on the regulations to make sure that it's more supportive of fintechs and what they're trying to do, which is very disruptive to the financial market, which in essence is a highly regulated market, specifically here in Saudi Arabia. So seeing this transition the next 2 years, and hopefully it's a quick one, at least for us, that's what we're going to keep our eye on. And we're trying always to figure out how we can get there to open finance, because that's what we're working on, because I can't agree more with going now to open finance. Going down to open economy, I think that's going to happen in Saudi Arabia. The government has already put up an infrastructure for integrating with different services. And I think within the next 3 to 4 years, there's going to be a ramp up of that open economy and having all these APIs available to develop new services. And we may even see more super apps in the market by 2025.
Perfect. Thanks, Gibran. So coming to you, Elena, given your experience of working in other markets, what kind of opportunity you see, not just for the fintechs, but also for banks where they can be excited about open banking and new revenue streams that it can open for them?
Well, excitement towards open banking comes only when you understand the power of consuming somebody else's APIs.
Yeah.
And not only that, having a framework where there is no need to go and build contracts or legals in place to be able to collaborate. And this is the beauty of open banking. It just be a friend with everybody, consume everybody, do whatever you want, build whatever product you want. Just it's complicated for a company that does financial services like a bank. They're doing lending for all of their life, let's say, and now they instantly need to switch off to a product cycle mentality. Like, what is there, how we should. It's like changing to an IT company from a bank. It's a very hard in any geography. If to mention open data and the scope, let's go back to like very simple things. Imagine every offline process that is very painful for you, like onboarding your child to school. The thing that Australian people were thinking about was like, okay, I want to make this happen from my phone online, but for this I need data structures that are okay to share the data. That would be governmental data, that would be school data, that would be banking data, insurance data, you name it. But they already have a vision for that. And this is something to be decided on a regulatory level, because they are the ones that facilitate this friendship, let's say, between banks and fintechs, but it's also drove by the competition in the market. Like you would see in the half a year use cases that you would not even imagine now, that combine even now with only open banking, insurance, I don't know, payroll or whatever, health, education, housing, everything in one place. And that's because of the imagination of the entrepreneurs in the market. So it's a challenge to the banks. Are you entrepreneur enough to switch that mentality and to move on to a different approach? I don't think everybody's ready. So let's start from the basic. Like, let's understand what's open banking and why it's really needed.
Absolutely. So coming back to you, Abe, I think you touched upon the opportunity a little bit in terms of embedded finance and banking as a service, where banks have a larger play rather than just looking at open banking from a compliance angle. Help us understand what's the opportunity look like in the region, because we have already seen the likes of Amazon and Apple launching financial products in the US and the UK. But do you see Middle East is there yet, or we are kind of couple of years behind the curve and we'll get there in the next couple of years? How do you see the industry evolve?
Based on research that we had done recently with one of our partners, we've actually identified that the embedded finance market, specifically in the region, is about $1.8 billion, and that's like considered, and we're forecasting that, conservatively, it will grow in the next 5 years, a compound annual growth rate of 35%, bringing up to $8.2 billion. And if we're really optimistic, the high estimates would be a CAGR of 60% if we get more, the likes of BSF and, I know some clients who are working on this who haven't shared it publicly, so I won't be able to mention that, but there's at least half a dozen banks across Saudi, across the UAE, who have been working on this and are looking at very interesting use cases. So, again, the bigger estimate is that would grow up to $19 billion. So the opportunity is there. The question really becomes, how do you take advantage of that? And that boils down to, again, the journey that you want to create. For example, one of our clients who approached us, they said, listen, you know what, if I want to partner with local e-commerce platforms, so the likes of noon.com, and when Souk, before it became Amazon, but if I were to approach them and say, listen, I'm a local bank, we're in the same country, we're based out of the UAE, and I want you to embed this capability to allow a merchant during their onboarding process and without leaving the onboarding portal to be able to open a bank account, receive their IBAN, and get that whole experience embedded into the journey. And for them, it was really about finding that point in the journey where they remove a lot of friction, because typically, and all of us who have launched companies in the region, myself included, know that opening a bank account is a nightmare. And this is a simple thing. When I opened a bank account for my own company, when I first moved to the region, it took me 3 months. And now I'm imagining if I had this experience built into the portal of the free zone where I had incorporated my company, I would have been a much happier customer, much more loyal customer, etc. But another interesting consideration you have to bear in mind with this whole embedded finance is who owns the client experience afterwards. So it's great, it's a big market, it's juicy, and I will come back to your point about, the revenue piece. But another consideration is who owns the relationship, who owns the experience. Is it, in the example I provided, is it the noon.com? Is it the free zone that incorporated me but allowed me to open the account? Or is it this bank, a financial institution that provided the API to perform KYC and sanction screening, to actually open the account, and to provide me my IBAN, and to send me my credentials so I can download the app and right away start banking on my app? Who owns the experience after your onboarding? And logically, now, and why, by the way, and this ties into the point about the revenue, why do banks do it? Is because that's one more client on their book of business. But now there has to be very, let's just say, stringent SLAs between the company that onboarded the customer on behalf of the bank, and the bank has to have certain expectations to make sure that they're collecting the right information and they're also compliant with all of this. Now, another thing to bear in mind is if this is done right, it can become a brand new revenue stream. And we've seen this, by the way. There have been very successful use cases, around the world. Comparing to the numbers I shared with you earlier when I said, the region is sitting this year around 1.8 billion. Compare that to a global market size of embedded finance, 56.7 billion. And again, that's anticipated to grow to, 570 billion by 2027. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there has been a lot of success stories in the market globally, and us in the Middle East, with the right mindset, the likes of BSF and the likes of even other licensed entities that have these capabilities, they could really start to create revenue streams for themselves, but add value to the market. I'll share one last example. When you look at companies that are consortiums, so they're not banks, but they're licensed. So, for example, you look at Benefit. Benefit is, consortium between all the banks in Bahrain, and they do things like credit bureau, your payments, your eKYC, etc. But what if they offer their eKYC service not just to banks, but to fintechs as well, and it's a clean API they can use? What if all of the payment APIs could also be accessed directly through Benefit because they're a licensed entity, and that is a form of embedded finance? Or to the point that Jobran made, it becomes like open payments. The Jopac in Jordan, again, consortium between the banks, etc. So there's different models that can be followed, but in general, this is a very interesting space for financial institutions. And in my humble opinion, I urge all of the banks that are about to embark on their open banking journey to think from the beginning and have conversations with your IT teams to say, guys, all I'm doing is just adding some extra endpoints, but rather than initiating a payment or providing data, I call an API that I already have that allows me to open a bank account, which is part of my digital banking stack. Does it make sense? Yes. So my advice to the market, talk about it now, because there is a great opportunity for you to create new revenue and add it to your balance sheet.
Absolutely, and we have started to see some of the banks in Europe and UK going through this strategy. For example, Starling is talking about Starling as a service, where they are partnering with non-banks and fintechs and monetizing the infrastructure that they have built over time. We also have examples from the US where Cross River Bank, which was a new bank, and they have monetized the infrastructure in a big way in the US. So I think there are success stories
a very funny fact that happened to me at Money 2020, for example. There were 3 or 4 banks that were selling services to fintechs. So it was
exactly
the other way around. This is where we're heading, so you understand.
Absolutely. Yeah, coming to you, Jobran. So one of the important aspects of financial inclusion is also talking about the new segment, the Gen Zs and the teens of the world, because they are coming up with very different behavior, very different affinities. And that's the segment that banks would struggle to onboard directly, right? Because they will rather work with a non-bank and a digital platform rather than go to a bank and open an account. Given your positioning in the market, how do you see open finance opening the opportunity for this consumer segment to become a part of financial services industry?
Great point. When you look at Gen Z and you look at millennials specifically, they're the new market coming in. They're driving a lot of the real estate purchases when we look at it globally, and even more specifically in different areas. And they're more demanding when it comes down to financial services, that instant gratification and that embedded services that they want. The metaverse comes into a point here where, when they have most of their services on there, having those APIs and those embedded services available in the metaverse is another opportunity. Whether it be on tokenization or on financial services, is a whole different discussion, but yet they're on that area. And they want more embedded services, and that's where it's heading with millennials. So having a bank app is one thing, but being able to make a transaction on the spot via another application or another platform is the future for millennials. They also want to make sure that everything's on one place. It makes sense. They're able to make decisions quickly. If they have to, go all over, or the financial terms are, a bit confusing, that's not something that they want. So open finance, open banking, and even the open economy is what millennials want. And the sooner that entities head off to that trajectory, the more that they'll be able to succeed and grow in the future. And that's where they need to be thinking about it. And just going back onto banks, we have a great example here in Saudi Arabia with the Arab National Bank. They were the only bank that had their doors open to fintechs. Any fintech that came by and said, I need an API, I need the service, they said, come in, we'll give you what you want. Up until today, all fintechs are connected with AMP. There's a lot of work going on with banks as well, but they're the first ones to just open up their bank and do banking as a service. And I do hope banks do take banking as a service seriously now in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, because that's where it's heading. Back to your question about millennials. If you don't open up that platform, you are excluding yourself from that market. It's only a matter of time when all these services will be available, rather by certain banks that do make that challenging step, or by others from other regions. So banking as a service should be a key pillar, if not the strategy, for a lot of the banks in the region. And I think that's what they're struggling with, is how can we be a utility and not be in the forefront? And that's what a lot of banks need to figure out here in the region, and specifically in Saudi Arabia.
Perfect. So coming to you, Alina, I think we discussed a little bit of opportunity around SME finance, Abe alluded to earlier. And given the way SME banking has been underserved for so many years, for so many reasons, how do you see open banking and open finance kind of enabling not just the fintechs and non-banks, but also banks to cost effectively serve that segment?
So let's look at the SME life, like what's crucial for them. Cash flow, right? It's an element that decides upon the fate of an SME, especially in the time of like ours. And if we divide it like in the two parts, on the fintech side, there are a lot of solutions that already use open banking. Like, for example, one of our clients, Odo, it's a big CRM and ERP. They use open banking data to enable businesses to reconcile invoices and payments and have a quick status on their finances so they can take fast decisions. And from the bank side, well, the most obvious use case would be like opening a bank account and easy access to lending, like loans for SMEs. And that's also a process that can be automated using open banking. Using open banking can make the process of giving a loan fully online. You can check all their accounts in all the banks, give a quick answer on the loan if you're okay or not. And sometimes they need their loan year to survive. And it goes the same for loan reimbursement, because you can use payment initiation to finish that process and allow the SMEs to pay at a very low cost the interest rates for you. And if you think of all the pains in a relationship to money for SMEs, I think this is the place of any use case that involves open banking, and it can solve them.
Perfect.
I'd like to add a couple of points to what Alina shared, because again, before joining Fintech Galaxy and in my career, I'm a banker, by the way, for people's information. I'm a banker who turned technologist almost. So I'm a bit of a guy who's in the middle here. But when I had my own company in Canada for the longest time before I moved to the Middle East, and even right now, I go through the pain of having to reconcile all of my my transactions to do all my taxes. And I kid you not, this may sound funny. I've been putting it off, and I'm not normally not a procrastinator for the last 3 months because I have to download bank statements from Amex, from Bank of Montreal, from Royal Bank, and credit cards and checking account, and then I got to send it to my accountant who is based in India for him to take it out of the statements and put it into my accounting solution. So just like when you think about, like Alina said, the life of a SME, it really revolves around your finances. And I like some of the examples that Alina kindly shared. But I also think when you start looking at direct integration with accounting solutions, when you start looking at payments, the cheaper payments that you could receive from direct account-to-account payment rather than having to accept a credit card payment, which costs you up to 5%, which as a SME, it would make a huge difference. And then, one of the things that I also wanted to share, and this is one of our specialties at Fintech Galaxy, which is open innovation, as you kindly said in the introduction, Sanjeev. Right now, if you guys go on FinHub 973, which is the digital lab that we stood up for Central Bank of Bahrain, the example that Alina suggested is actually published there as a problem statement. And Bahrain Islamic Bank, BISB, is going through exactly that. They said, we want to use open banking to do STP, straight-through processing of loans. When you think about it, everything to do from eliminating the need to request a stack of audited, 3-year audited financial statements, because you can just simply pull the data directly out of all the banks that you interact with through online banking, through open banking rather. The ability to use, payment initiation to disperse the funds, as Alina kindly suggested, and then everything in between, which is leveraging the data to provide insights and potentially even do cross-sell. So I think, in my humble opinion, I'll just conclude by saying this. One of the biggest gaps in financial services, and that has been going on for the last decade, is there was a big focus on retail, massive focus on corporate, and SME fell through the crack. Now we have an opportunity with this new technology, with this new framework, with open finance to really turn this around. And for smart governments that are saying, God bless his soul, the late Sheikh Nahyan, he said, the day I ran out of the last barrel of oil is the day I celebrate. And why did he say that? Because in the vision of the UAE, as an example, it already stated that we have to optimize our small business segment because that is the future. Enough said.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the GDP contribution of SMEs in almost all the Middle East countries, it is somewhere between 20% to 40%. And employment contribution is even higher, 40% to 60%.
Yes.
So I think it's an important sector, not just for the governments and regulators to look after, but also for the banks, because they are the bedrock of evolution of the economy in the region to really focus on the segment and go after the opportunity.
Exactly.
Perfect. I think we are coming towards the end of our session, and I just wanted to touch upon the final thing, which is the challenges for open banking in the region. And that becomes a little tricky, but I would love to hear your views on what are some of the most important obstacles you see towards the progression of embracing open finance in Middle East. Why don't we start with you, Alina?
Thank you. Actually, this is something that I mentioned in the beginning. The biggest challenge is not everyone being on board. You want the fintechs are ready to consume. The banks, maybe some of the banks are also into this to consume and build products and so on. But if not everybody is on board, if you don't open the APIs in a good way in terms of if they are compliant, you have all this little feature like redirection back to the giving a status, whatever. So it's a lot of details that make this journey seamless. And if not everybody understand what's the value for this, no one will strive going there. Like there is a difference between your culture in the culture in Europe. Failure is not accepted in your region. This is something that I understood. So my call to action to you is to be consistent with your culture and do it right from the first time. Like go and understand what's the benefit for your business. And if you understood, go to the other banks and explain to them, this is the benefit from open banking. Let's do this together. And if you embark on this journey, you'll have a lot to win. And my wish for you is to win. So thank you.
Perfect. Abe, over to you on the challenge.
Honestly, I could really talk about this till tomorrow morning, but just to keep it brief, like some of the major challenges with the open banking model is from the beginning, and as I shared earlier, the banks are not taking the time to understand how do I properly maximize value for me and for the market for my clients. There is no clear revenue model for the banks. Oftentimes, they just look at this as a checkbox exercise. There aren't enough quality TPPs in some markets. Markets like Saudi, they've got very good quality. Markets like Bahrain, they've got good, but they're quite a few. And then you've got markets where they've got none, and then yet they're still trying to push open banking. We're also finding that there isn't any unified solutions for merchants, for business clients. So you'll find that there isn't any consistency in the service that some of these players will receive. And there isn't proper awareness when it comes to adoption. So whether it's adoption by the end users, the consumers, or adoption by merchants and businesses, or adoption even by banks, they don't fully understand what this is all about and what is the potential that it will bring to the market. And as a result, they are quite resistant. And I'll just share one small anecdote. I was sitting with a CEO of a fully digital bank, and I'm asking him about your plans for connecting and becoming open banking enabled because it's coming to the region. And this country, they hadn't pushed out the regulation. And to my surprise, his response was, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not exposing my data. I don't want to get hacked. And that made me realize how much that there is a lack of awareness in the market. So to me, one of the big challenges as well is not taking the time to educate the market on what it really is and why is it secure and why is it better than what already happens in the market with screen scraping and some of the other messy things. So I'll leave it at that. I think Alina said it very well, and I've heard it directly from regulators. We cannot fail because the moment we fail in that first step, everything is just going to fold. So do it right from the beginning, and that will really help pave the path forward.
Perfect. Last pointers from you, Zubran, on the key challenges for open banking in Saudi.
Like I said in the beginning, this is an exciting time. A lot of innovation, a lot of there are a lot of young entrepreneurs.
I think Zubran is facing some challenges of his own. All right. I think, yeah, Zubran, go ahead.
No, that was it. Just, in essence, it's just an exciting time. We'll leave it at that.
Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot, gentlemen and ladies, for sharing your views on the open banking, open finance journey and relevance for the Middle East region. Thanks a lot for joining the session, and handing it over to Amir for taking the session forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Great. That was a wonderful session, and I think for people who are joining us on this next session with Jobran, so I have the pleasure of introducing Jobran Al-Shahrani. Jobran, if I make a mistake in pronouncing the company name, please let me know. The company Mudakhar. So it's wonderful to have you here. My understanding is you make the concept of saving a habit, budgeting a virtue, and really what you're trying to achieve is allow people, consumers, to achieve their financial goals. So I'm hoping that we can, in this session, we can take us deeper in terms of what's happening in Saudi and share with us some of your journey. Jobran, if you don't mind sharing your presentation, and then you can take it from there.
Sure. Okay, so hopefully,
if you can put it in full screen mode, Jobran.
It is in full screen. So please let me know, is that what you see on your side?
Not totally. It's not in the presentation mode.
Let me share the whole screen, and maybe this one will.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Perfect.
thank you. Well, thank you very much for your time and for having me here. And just it's a great segue from the panel that we just had to just talk about and zoom in into what's happening in Saudi Arabia, and talk about exactly what's happening with open banking. So just to summarize a few key points, open banking is a phenomenon that's just taken over financial services. We see this in every region and in every financial sector. 2022 is the breakout year for open banking. There's a couple of banks that are now in that received the license to operate in the sandbox. We expect that to double by next year. We see open banking maturing, and as we just mentioned in the panel, we expect that to move into open finance and open economies going forward. There's just a lot of use cases that are available, and we believe that there's just a lot of room for growth in that area. And again, the final key point is a collaboration, right? It's from the regulator, government entities, banks, brokerages, exchanges, and so on. They all have to collaborate and have that kind of approach where we offer APIs and services. Moving on, and I won't stay too long on this slide, is just to kind of show the landscape of what's being done. And one of the key takeaways here is a lot has been done when it comes to open banking. A lot of regulations, a lot of central banks and government entities have been established to make sure that open banking is being implemented. And it just shows that within the next few years, back to the points that we just mentioned, we expect a lot of growth and a lot of support on open banking in the upcoming years. Zooming into the Middle East, we see that Bahrain specifically has done a lot of movement and a lot of great steps when it comes down to open banking, and I'm talking regulatory wise here. And it's one of the first countries to have here in the region to have full regulation when it comes down to open banking. Saudi Arabia with SAMA and CMA as well, they are working on open finance and open banking, and we expect open banking regulations to be out this year. We expect in the next few months a draft will be shared with all entities and the public to put in their thoughts on it and give that feedback. And then maybe by 2023, a full-fledged regulation for open banking will be out there. Egypt and UAE. Egypt, we mention it here because it's one of the biggest markets here in the region, retail-wise, and we expect we're as entrepreneurs, we want to see more work when it comes down to regulations down in Egypt. UAE is another open market. It took a lot of great steps when it comes down to open banking. Open banking payments are available in UAE versus Saudi Arabia, but yet a lot needs to be done on the regulatory side when it comes to UAE. continuing on, when we look at the landscape in Saudi Arabia, I just want to just go through the key, initiatives that SAMA has done, which is the central bank here in Saudi Arabia, from e-banking rules to CMA FinTech Lab that they launched in 2016, formation of FinTech and establishment of regulatory sandbox. The e-commerce law was key to growing the e-commerce landscape, payment services and providers, and finally, the new rules for debt-based crowdfunding, open banking policy, which they just introduced, launching of instant system, which is SARI, which is quicker payments, and finally, the introduction of data protection law, which is one of the key pillars when it comes down to open banking. So these are guided by the 2030 vision, and part of the 2030 vision is the Financial Sector Development Program, FSDP. And FSDP is a term you'll hear from a lot of fintechs, a lot of banks, and everyone in the financial sector, because this is the program where all entities collaborate, back to that point on collaboration. And they just recently opened up on, and we will present this, a number of initiatives to help grow fintech within the region. When we look at the landscape, we have 16 fintechs that are licensed at this point, 15 experimental permits. This is where fintech goes through a regulatory screening process, making sure cybersecurity is in place, making sure that risk and other kind of policies that are key are being implemented, so that when these fintechs operate in the sandbox, it protects the consumer. A side note here, there has been a lot of fraud that has been happening in the market, and SAMA and CMA has put consumer protection at the heart of a lot of these initiatives, and that is why we have these experimental permits, is to ensure to protect the consumer. And finally, there's 15 startups permitted testing the SAMA sandbox regulatory up into 2021. We expect that to double. So from our position and Muddakhar, that means there's going to be a lot of competition, and at the same time, it means a lot of use cases and a lot of innovation within the market. Just to quickly kind of summarize or go through how it's set up. So the 2030 vision has these three, streams or broader guidelines and goals, which is having a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. When we look at those two, thriving economy, definitely about growth, growing these new ideas, growing these new entities, and ambitious nations to have enable social responsibility. And with these two, financial inclusion, fintechs, and growing these kind of different environments is key to or part of and aligned to the strategy of 2030. And we look at different objectives, and I'll go through all of them, but offering diverse set of products, inclusive structure through higher bank accounts and SMEs. We just mentioned SMEs in our panel, so it is part of the strategy. More digitized economy, including higher levels of non-cash transactions. This is a big part of what they're trying to do. Financial stability and development of the digital infrastructure. So all these relate to open banking, and we can easily see the use cases that relate to open banking. So open banking will gradually, set up that infrastructure for those use cases and for those services. And that's what makes it an exciting time right here in Saudi Arabia. And by the way, Amr, if there's any questions that pop up, I'm more than happy to take them now if there's any, or if there's a couple of questions. You just let me know. So just quickly talking about the initiatives within the FinTech program and how it relates to SAMA. We see that there's 11 initiatives that they've launched. Starting with speeding up cloud. Cloud has been a challenge for us as a FinTech. There's not a lot of cloud providers that have this easy access for entrepreneurs to set up. But we see this at the heart of the strategy, and we expect more cloud providers to provide in the kingdom. Reason for that is, by regulation, all data needs to be located in the kingdom and hosted within the kingdom. So that kind of gives you limited options on what you have for cloud services. Having accelerator policies and making sure that these kind of technologies are supported through regulation as part of the Ministry of Communication and Financial Technology. They're trying to set that up and making sure that fintechs are supported, implementations and activation of open banking activity. As we just mentioned, there's a lot that's being done on it. Enhancing innovation related to financial technology as a central bank, Again, central bank is pushing for that innovation, making sure that fintechs are being supported. To that point, empowerment of fintechs organizations within the framework, making sure that fintechs are taken seriously, and they are now part of the regulation process. And the same goes for the CMA, which is the Capital Market Authority. So with the central bank and the Capital Market Authority, they'll make sure that fintechs are part of that regulation. Defining funding sources and making sure that there's enough funding when it comes to fintechs. Fintechs are expensive, and they want to make sure that that lifeline when it comes down to financials is available. Branding the kingdom, making sure that it's one of the hubs, if not the hub, for fintechs in the upcoming years is a big part of it, and that just shows the push from the government when it comes down to fintechs. Enhancing knowledge about fintechs in Saudi Arabia, supports that idea by making sure that there's enough outreach programs when it comes to international markets. They want to make sure, fintech is, or Saudi fintech, which is an entity that supports fintechs here in the kingdom. You see this in some of the other countries. There's Fintech Hive in Dubai, for example, and they want to make sure that they support fintechs. And finally, coordinating local and global partnerships just to make sure that the market is open enough and there's more collaboration also with regional players and international players. So, we see that the main entities, whether it's the Ministry of Communication, the Central Bank, CMA, Munsha'at, which is the SME authority here in the kingdom, and finally Saudi FinTech, which is the entity to help support fintechs. So moving on here, I'm just going to quickly go through the consumer trends. The gist of this slide is just to say that there is a lot of consumption, there's a lot of need, and there's a lot of adoption when it comes down to e-commerce. And when you look at these numbers, let's say the median age right here is 31.8. That shows millennials are a big part of the market. And this shows that there's a push to make sure that these kind of financial services are innovative and meets their needs and their requirements. When we look at consumer trends in financial services, we see that financial inclusion isn't a big issue here in the kingdom. There's a lot of spending from points of sale, and we recently saw this increase in the last 3 months, and we expect that to continue to grow. So in total, the market here, when it comes down to financial spending and the demographic, is very encouraging for fintechs in general. And open banking being the part of the infrastructures that support these kind of services shows just the amount of promise that exists within the market. Just to take another look at the landscape and specifically on the different entities that exist within the market. So we have 32 licensed banks. We expect this to increase by 3 more banks that are digital. They have not been announced yet. There's 252 investment funds. So there's a lot of funds that need to be catered to. The banking sector, by the time we did this report, was 832 billion USD. And this just shows the amount and the depth that the market has. Fintech sector has grown. Up and now there's 110 fintech startups. Again, we expect that to double. There's a lot of push from the government. One of the fintech unicorns we have is STC Pay. That's from the Saudi Telecom company. Up until now, or up until October 2021, there has been 750 million. If I ballpark this to the numbers that we have, I think it has exceeded that number, maybe down to 940 up until this point. Just to look at the banks, when you look at customer deposits, you have your top banks right there. The capital markets, again, you look at the top banks over there. And the idea here is to, see that there's just a lot of banks here in the kingdom that have that majority of the market. When you take all banks and investment banks, it just shows you the depth of how much is there in the capital market and the banks, and how much of an opportunity there is when it comes down to financial services. So when we look at the landscape, here's just another zoom in into the fintech landscape. We can see personal finance, treasury management, specifically with Muddakhar, Mala'a. You see open banking and infrastructure with Tarabut Gateway, Lean, Rapid. These are just some of the companies that work on open banking. There's a couple like DFN Robo Advisory that works with open banking. We expect a lot of these companies to actually use open banking down the road for some of their services. And that just shows the amount of opportunity that there is. A lot of these companies will increase in the next year. So it's a good, opportunity to keep an eye out onto these companies and what's going on in the landscape. So, just to talk about the timing is great for open banking. Rather, it's from the supply side where, banks now, a lot of people trust their banks. They're using fintechs. They're open to having digital transactions. And from a demand side, individuals have used at least one fintech. COVID has increased that non-cash payments. And just looking at these two sides, and then as we discussed the enabling policy of the infrastructure, it just shows that there's a push, and it's the best time to get into open banking and open finance on that perspective. And again, Amr, please let me know if there's any questions from any of the audience. I'm more than happy to take it, or if we reach towards the end of our presentation. Collaborative ways and where we're heading off to it. I just want to reiterate this. I won't spend too much time. It's that open banking, open finance, and open economy, and how that's the opportunity and the growth for everyone in the fintech industry. And open banking is the infrastructure. As we saw from the panel, different people have different perspectives. Some will say open finance is how we should go, but again, this is just the opportunity that exists. And this is kind of the framework, or the strategic framework, that a lot of fintechs and banks should be looking at when it comes down to the opportunity of open banking. When we look at government officials and what they have done with the strategy, what they have said, we look at His Excellency Abdullah Swaha, who is the Minister of Communication and Information Technology. He just basically highlighted that, there's a growth of 200%. And this was just recently in May, where he wants to highlight that there's been a lot of growth in fintech, and he believes this will drive a lot of support and need for technology and technology regulation. When we look at Ziad Yusuf, who is the Deputy Governor of Development Technology, who overlooks the development in fintech, you see his push and how he believes open banking is the heart of innovation and innovation here in the kingdom. And he believes that a lot of business models will be transforming and impacted by open banking. Overall in conclusion and the way forward, and just to summarize what we've heard from the panel and from this presentation, is just 2 points. One is regulatory nudges and growing competition. This is from a white paper we did with Whiteside, and basically we believe that there's a lot that needs to be done on the regulation side. We don't want to rely 100% on the regulator, but the regulator can help fuse that cooperation and that work that's going to go back and forth between the different entities and the different companies that are working within the sector. In addition, there's going to be a lot of competition, a lot of use cases and that competition will drive different use cases, and that's good for the innovation in the market. Eventually, within the 5 years, there could be more consolidation, or some of the startups not being able to continue on within the journey. But a lot of use cases will be centered on these applications, and that'll just open up the innovation and push the financial sector to that open finance and open economy. And the futuristic evolution is the second part, and that comes down to what banks are doing, what fintechs are doing. We just saw the Minister of Telecommunication and Information Technology talking about that. It will be the backbone of open banking, making sure that APIs are available, rather it be from government entities, banks, or other businesses. Integrating these different APIs opens up new use cases and opens up opportunity to integrate more technology. So whether that's from wearables down to the metaverse, these are all going to be platforms that open banking will be a part of. So with these 2 points, we conclude our presentation. Hopefully I didn't go too quick through the presentation, but I do want to hear the questions and take a few questions if possible. And off that note, I want to thank you all for being with me here today. And I will, end the presentation there and just take any questions, if there's anything, Amr, from your side.
Sure. Jobran, thank you. This is very, very comprehensive, a lot of information. So some questions, I think maybe the audience is also more interested to know more about your own journey. You've been operating for a couple of years, and probably by now you'd know what you would do differently. There's a lot of activity, as you said, in 2022, a lot of clarity, a lot of regulations. 23 going to be a bigger year. You mentioned timing is important. You mentioned cloud. If you were advising somebody, a fintech, trying to establish in Saudi, what are the things that you would say go faster, or what are the things that you say go slower?
Excellent point. I would say go faster when it comes down to technology. Going through the regulatory process, which we have been through along with other fintechs, is, let's say, time consuming. Making sure that you have all these policies up, setting up cybersecurity, setting up risks, and so on. For an entrepreneur or for a small business, this can be a bit challenging, or can be seen as a mundane process versus developing the application, developing the APIs, or developing the technology. And the further you have your technology, the easier it'll be to meet these regulatory requirements. So I say double down on your technology, double down on what you have on your application, on your platform, and then work with the regulator to be compliant with what they need. Also, the regulator is in the process of developing these regulations, so there's not 100% clarity. We expect all the APIs that we developed to be changed in the next few months as more regulation comes in with more specifics, or they may not go into the specifics of the APIs. So that's why I say just do the technology, have your team up, and look at monetization. I think that's a key thing about here in fintech. If you're a startup and you cannot monetize your business, it's very hard to continue that journey as you go and try to get capital out there in the market. So look at those two things, worry about the regulators after that, and be prepared for them, because it does take time to prepare for those points.
So one question, what does your experimental license allow you to do? Does that limit how many customers you can sign up with? How does that work?
Excellent. So the key thing, and why Sama set it up this way, is to protect consumers. And like I mentioned, there was a lot of fraud that happened in the market, especially in the Middle East, texts going out, people sharing their OTPs. And they want to make sure that fintechs that enter the sandbox can protect the consumer. So they're resolving that one risk. The second one is it is onboarding users at a certain limit. I think it changes from one company to another and one industry to another, but there is a limit. And the reason why is just to test that application. Can it handle it? Can it handle those API calls? Is there any security threats that they see? And just trying to understand from both sides, because we do give feedback to Sama. Sama talks to us almost on a weekly basis, gets that feedback from us. How does it look? What are the struggles that you have with banks? How about users? Are they enjoying what they're seeing? Is there any gaps that you've seen so far? So that's kind of the process when you're inside the sandbox.
So it's similar to, again, what's in UAE. You have like this for the experimental sandbox is a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then eventually you graduate, and then you can open the door fully. Was this a consideration when you got into this? Was this timeline or this kind of approach, was a consideration in terms of planning for financing and funding? How important is that for somebody who is trying to do what you've done in Saudi?
Well, I think, definitely for any entrepreneur or for any startup, financing is what you need to go and move forward. But again, back to the first question, get your technology working and make sure you have a technologist within your team that can handle, a lot of the programming, a lot of the development that can help. There's a lot of accelerated programs that you can be a part of. They'll give you the right coaching and they'll give you the right amount of funding that'll keep you going for a period of time. And VCs are hungry for opportunities. So funding is key, but it's not a challenge. There's a lot of liquidity in the market. VCs here in Saudi Arabia and also in UAE are, ready, and they're looking forward to these next opportunities.
Okay, great. A couple of questions from the audience. So one around, guess, your hardware infrastructure? If there is no cloud, what did you end up doing? And second one, I guess, are you planning to use blockchain in terms of your offering, embedded in your offering?
Great questions. So let me clarify. Cloud does exist, but there's only a limited number of vendors that offer it because everything has to be hosted here in the kingdom. So there is a vendor that offers it. We use Oracle. We have no physical infrastructure. And that's something that the regulator had to accept. Imagine a regulator that goes to banks, wants to see the land, wants to see the servers. Now you're telling them it's all virtual, nothing. I don't have anything physical. So all the fintechs, do not have a physical infrastructure. They're all on the cloud, whether it's Oracle Cloud, whether it's some of the local telecoms here in the kingdom. Google will be opening soon. I believe by 2023 they'll be fully functional and operated. So that's one infrastructure you can use. There's talks with AWS. Hopefully they'll be here by 24, 25. And that's how you do it. You don't need a physical infrastructure. On the second, I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Blockchain. Are you planning to use blockchain in embedded in your offering or not?
So DeFi and blockchain and setting up that infrastructure is very intriguing, but it hasn't been fully embraced here in the kingdom. They're working on it. They're working on cryptocurrency or a digital payment, digital currency that framework that they're working on. The simple answer would be no, not at this moment of time. But we're keeping an eye on it as an option later on, as an infrastructure that will have DeFi options for people that use the application.
Okay, fantastic. And in working in terms of the solution that you're providing is more focused on the budgeting, expense management, goal setting, correct?
Correct. That's one part of it. Yes.
So, sorry, go ahead. My follow-up to that is you are dependent in having the open APIs to pretty much most of the banks in Saudi to expand and scale your user base. Do you get clarity from the banks as far as their timing to open up? Is the plan in 2022, 2023, and how do you manage that?
Great point. When we first started with the application, we were talking about either scraping, backward engineering, or just doing APIs. But we went with APIs. We said we want that official handshake with the banks. And then lucky enough, SAMA announced the Open Banking Initiative, and it just worked from there. The way we're setting up our application is we want to integrate APIs from different entities, whether it's from financial services, different government entities, other businesses, and offer services to the user. So it's a one-stop shop where they 3 clicks away from either getting a mortgage, maybe later on finding that exact home that they can get a mortgage for, processing the payments on the application via open banking payments. So that's how we're looking at it. We rely on the banks, and the good thing about SAMA is SAMA pushed the banks to open up their doors, have a conversation with us. And a lot of these banks are now working on the back end because I think they're trying to figure out their strategic position, but now SAMA has pushed them to make sure that those APIs are out there. Our expectations by the end of Q3, at least 3 to 4 banks will have open banking APIs out there specifically on information, and we believe payments will be ready by H2 next year. I would love to have it sooner, but that's our expectation. Banks are open to kind of do sandbox kind of activities, and it depends from one business to another if they want to go through that route or not.
I appreciate for that. I think we've come to the end of this session, Jobran. I wanted to thank you for sharing a lot of, I think, detailed, clear information for our audience. Best of luck, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We're getting for our next session. All right, Faisal is here. Well, I have the pleasure of having another entrepreneur and experienced individual, Faisal Gori from Halal Payment Network. Faisal is and his team are on a mission to create a complete Sharia-based platform and ecosystem. So I'm going to hand over to Faisal and introduce himself and take us through what's happening from a Sharia compliant ecosystem and application in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Thank you, Ahmed. Thanks for a brief introduction. My name is Faisal. I have a fintech based in Canada called Halal Payment Networks. We are mainly focusing on the providing the our Muslim community the Islamic and Sharia compliant products through our Halal Payment Network ecosystem. Uh, Currently, I'm based in Saudi Arabia, so I am covering Saudi Arabia, the Middle East region, and the North American region. Now, let's go back to the presentation. So, the main topic today is what is halal payment and what is open banking, and how we can get the Sharia compliant finance or payment system through the open banking. So all of us know open banking is a global movement where we are allowing third party payment providers to access through the APIs to the customer information. These third party providers could be telecom companies, any utilities, business, fintech, or anything. And by this slide, we are going to explain the bank is opening their APIs and then providing access to the TPP through the API. And these TPPs are building up the products and innovations through the fintech, what they are offering by collecting the customer data through these API. Why open banking, what it is benefiting? This is benefiting, for example, the improving the customer experience, customer service. The product life cycle is very quick. You are ready to launch to market product compared to conventional banking system. This is a new revenue system, more insight driven data, and being viewed as an innovator in the market and increase compliance with the regulations. Now, let's see what others are talking about the open banking. For example, Deloitte is talking about open banking. EY is saying open banking is reshaping financial services as regulators and governments seek to increase competition and choice. There is a research and market report expecting 37.77 billion worldwide open banking industry by 2025. So there are so many things happening since last few years on the open banking. And if we see the landscape of this open banking, so we can see mostly this is most mature and driven through the Europe. In Europe, most of the open banking initiatives are international level, others are national and industry levels. The other view of the same, if we see uh, the development of the open banking in the geographical region, majority of the implemented open banking systems are in Europe, China, Hong Kong, and emerging markets are Africa, Middle East, and part of the Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Australia. These are transitional at the moment. Now, coming back to the main topic, what is Sharia or halal compliance? You have heard a lot of buzzwords: halal banking, Sharia compliance, Islamic finance, ethical banking, and so on. All of these are same. All of these are driven by the Sharia law, which is the divine law for the religion. One of the report is issued by uh, sh- uh, issued by the Islamic and Western Finance Development Report. These at the moment 135 countries are covered by IFDI, which is Islamic Financial Development Institutes. $3.374 trillion market is there, which is expecting to be growth 8% on yearly basis by 2025. There is a one myth, in my opinion, because most of the people think Islamic finance or Islamic economic principles, this is only for Muslims. I think this is a myth. And how I will explain this myth is through one of my tagline I usually use in my North American market. If the halal meat is more hygienic, so halal finances. Uh, I will not go into much detail that what or how is halal meat is hygienic, but based on my personal experience when I was in North American market, I have seen there are more non-Muslims customers on halal meat shop than normal Muslims. Although we know that halal meat is more expensive than regular meat, although we know that halal meat supply chain is much lesser than regular meat, but people, especially non-Muslims, are buying because they understand this is hygienic. So this was enabled by the trust and awareness. The same we need to make the concept in the finance, halal finance industry, to enable the trust and the awareness, to let people know this is not only for Muslim, this is for the humanity, and this is for the everyone. Now, Islamic financial institutions with the open banking can do many things. For example, currently with the conventional banking, if I want to open the financial institute, I need a lot of funds, I need a lot of regulations to be complied, and I need many other factors to be factor on before proceeding for any financial institute. The beauty with the open banking, for example, banking as a service, fintech as a service, API based fintech, uh, you you are not spending much. It is cost efficient, it is lesser time, flexible, and it is agile. uh, I will not go into much product based, but few of the ideas through this presentation, I would say one of the thing which is community is suffering and which we can utilize this beautiful open banking platform is the zakat and sadqa and waqf. Uh, in order to calculate the zakat, you need to know the individual worth, and now my individual worth could be spreaded over multiple different financial institutions. So if I am fetching all this information through the API and calculating the zakat actually as per the Sharia law, that will ease all of the customers which are paying the zakat by end of the year, uh, every year. And this is very huge market, and this is where we can work a lot on this. The second solution could be is the wasiyat, which is the inheritance law, where we need to also find documentation to access all the asset and liability information of an individual. Uh, if the any Muslim dies, his or her wealth needs to be distributed according to the Islamic inheritance law. So, similar to the Vasya documentation, fintech innovation to compute for right distribution would also require access to the deceased assets and liabilities, which spreaded data across different various institutions. Again, with published open APIs, access to the data will be very easy and possible, and this will be provide great value to the customer. Existing solutions currently, the personal investment apps are there, solutions are there with open banking. There are home ownerships in North American market is there, savings are there, payments products there, crowdfunding, Sharia compliance products are there, and P2P lending products are also there. uh, I'm not going to finish here. I would you utilize this time to share with the experience why halal payments come up in the market. When we were there in North American market, in European market, we have seen majority of the Muslim community was unbanked there, especially in USA and Canadian market, because of the lack of the trust with the financial product provider. So they are unbanked, they are not buying their home, they are not going for mortgages, they are not going for car leasing, they are still living on the rent. So there is a huge potential which we studied, and then we developed this halal payment networks ecosystem in Canadian market to provide the Sharia compliant products by enabling their trust to provide the right products for the right people through our super app in Canadian market. A lot of work still needs to be done. What I'm trying to present here is this is a huge market. This is not only for the Muslim or specific beliefs perspective. For an example, India, we have 300 million plus Muslims, but overall it's 1.2 plus billion plus population. So if we target based on the population, we can cater a lot of business through this open banking system according to the Sharia compliance. That's it from my side.
Thanks, Faisal.
Amir.
Yes, thank you for that. There's a question. As you're building the platform, maybe if you can explain a little bit about the platform. Are you onboarding different service providers onto the platform? And if you are, how do you select them? Is there a criteria? Same way that we have cybersecurity checks and what have you. How do you apply those criterias to make sure what they are offering is Sharia compliant?
Okay. So very right question for the right time. We have multiple criteria to onboard multiple partners. We are trying to capture the aggregator market in the North America. So currently there are so many fintech, Islamic Sharia compliant fintechs are there. For example, there is Wahid, there is Manzil, there are many other products, but they are doing as a individual fintech perspective. There is no aggregator to provide all of these services through the Sharia compliant ecosystem. So the criteria for the Sharia compliance is we have different criteria. Then, as you asked, cybersecurity, we have different criteria, and then we need to see the local regulations as well. So we cater all three criteria to onboard any partners to our ecosystem. Most probably, most of these partners are already well established. They are already providing services to different sectors. We are just providing our aggregation services to these partners.
Okay. And you're doing similar things, I guess, as you're expanding in different markets. So
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, and we are expanding in different markets, and we are, for example, Canadian market open banking regulations not yet released. It was just last year they released as a advisory, which will be, I believe, by next 2023 they will be announced the proper regulations. Then we need to customize accordingly.
Okay. And do you see the opportunity here? Open banking. We talk about banks opening up, access to the data, but you acting as an aggregator. Do you see the opportunity for you also turning back to the bank to offering the different types of services, so then they can offer that to their end customers? Since a lot of banks, in particular in Canada, don't offer Sharia compliant products and services.
Definitely, this is a big opportunity for the aggregator Sharia compliant service provider like us to provide the services to the conventional and traditional banks back in any market, not only in Canadian or North American market, any market. This is the big opportunity for us.
Okay. And how do you see, you are mostly operating in North America, and you're looking at the Saudi market. Are you looking at elsewhere? How do you see the different regions of the world in terms of their open banking and enabling what you're trying to build?
As we have seen the footprint of the open banking, we know the European market is much mature. They are the pioneer to initiate this open banking initiative a few years back. Saudi market is, as I was hearing other speakers as well, is still under the regulation which is about to be announced by SAMA. Other markets like Bahrain and Middle East region, they are also transitioning into open banking. There is a huge potential for us, but however, we are currently focusing more on Canadian and North American market because there is a huge unbanked population which we and others needs to tap before expanding to the Middle East and European region. However, the local regulations could be changed, which will be little bit tricky. For example, if we expand to any other region where the regulations is conflicting with our framework, which will be very tricky. So we need to wait for the regulations for before the expansion.
Or you might look for other partners as joint ventures, maybe in other markets.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Now you mentioned your focus is on the unbanked at the moment. How do you see moving, the kind of say Sharia compliant loans and services? Do you see expanding into the SME market? Because a lot of the unbanked sometimes, are also entrepreneurs, SMEs, maybe sole proprietary. How do you see that market developing for you for these type of services and products?
See, the demand is there, and it was there since the day one. The only issue was the what I have noticed is the lack of trust. There was a few incidents happened in the past where different organizations comes into the picture with the Sharia compliance certificate, and later stage they tend to be different, and they left the market with the very bad results. So that lack of trust and that incidents make this market very resist to adopt any new player coming into the market. We are trying to enabling the trust based on our experience in Saudi Arabia, based on our experience working with different other Muslim countries. We are enabling at the moment the trust in the North American market within the community and outside the community. Our first focus is community, and second focus is outside the community. But yes, SMEs and others definitely require the products, Sharia compliant products they are waiting for. We are working on that gradually, and surely within next 2 to 3 years we will be have right solutions for them.
Yeah, I think you picked on the topic of trust, which I think is key for any financial institution. So on one hand, I personally kind of believe, obviously working with my bank would require that trust. On the other hand, open banking also requires me to give access to data from different sources. How are you tackling that side of trust? How sort of the education? There is a lot of, I guess it's a follow-up question. There's a lot of education going on amongst ourselves in the fintech community about open banking. But do you see a lot of education is happening on the consumer side, what open banking is and why they can or should trust or not trust it?
There is always a need for the awareness and education for the consumers. Luckily, the Saudi market or Middle East market is more towards the young generations. Most of the population are young, so it's easy to generate the awareness and training. But other side, if you are talking about North American market, the situation is not similar as Middle East market, where you need to push more towards the awareness, and there are so many even with conventional banking. Even you have so many frauds happening in the past where they are lacking their trust. So this is ongoing work where you need to keep pushing the awareness in the market through different campaigns and different segments.
Yeah, very true. I guess just one couple of last questions. If you were going to do it all over again, what you started here, a few years back, what would you say that you would do more faster, and what would you say you would skip it and not worry about it and maybe do it later?
Definitely, based on our own experience, the Canadian market, which is considered as one of the growing market, but still we face a lot of challenges. Still, we face even a lot of challenges by opening a bank account as a corporate. So still that needs to be revived. Still that needs to be revisit the framework. If I will get a chance to do it again, I will try to learn the lessons from our past experience, as well as to educate the market and the regulators how we can make it faster for the newcomers in the market.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Faisal, I appreciate your presentation and sharing the knowledge and information. I don't see any more questions from the audience. I think with this, we can bring this session to a close. And just want to remind the audience, we're going into the break until 1 p.m. So you can come back into the sessions after 1 p.m. In the meantime, make sure you take advantage of the treasure hunt, the prize to be won, as well as the partner village and the expo. So I wish everybody a good break and hope to see everyone at 1 p.m. Thank you.